Hi, welcome to Cryptid Wilderness Research. I am Daniel Becker here in Anchorage, Alaska. Joining me, as always, from Quincy, Washington, my fellow host, Matt Slater.
Hello.
Joining us today from the great state of Missouri, author, documentary filmmaker, and cryptid investigative journalist. That's what I like to call her, Linda Eastburn.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. Great having you.
Glad to be here.
So you have just come out with a new book called Threshold to Encounters. Tell us about this book and tell us about how it all came together.
Well, it was kind of interesting because, for a long time, I've been a UFO researcher, paranormal researcher, intuitive, remote viewer, that sort of thing. And about a year and a half ago, when I started doing the Bigfoot interviews for my YouTube channel, I started getting a lot of information that I noticed correlated with some of the research I'd done with the UFO stuff. So with that information, I decided to put together a lot of both of those accounts because these encounters seem to have some overlap. Mostly with the people that were having those encounters, a lot of them were having the same experiences. With all kinds of things, but a lot of cryptids, a lot of varied cryptids, and aliens are actually considered a cryptid because it's not proven that they actually exist. But there were also, kind of a go-between between a lot of paranormal things also that I was hearing described. Now, these things appear to be very flesh and blood physical, and that's certainly something I take into consideration in the book. And there's a lot of evidence that shows that they have physical properties. There's no doubt about that. But oftentimes there's some people that have these accounts with them that are not as much flesh and blood. So I decided to put a book together, and not only does it cover tons of research I've done for years and years on many different cryptids and other paranormal things, but it also puts together theories and ideas of other things we might be dealing with that we may not have thought of. And I take this back. I used to be a hypnotherapist, or did it much more than I do today. And at one point in time, I remember there was a man came to my house, and he was taking a class of mine. I was teaching hypnosis at the time, and he was taking a class, and I was offering a kind of a practice night for people. And he was the only one that showed up this time. And he started asking some strange questions. And a lot of them were about mind control and some kind of unusual things that he had experienced. And he was very reluctant to give me much information. He would kind of say a few things, then he'd back off of that. Then he'd say a little bit more, and then he'd back off of that. But it ended up that he had moved east. He was from my neck of the woods in Missouri, and he had moved back east, went to college. After college, he got married, and he married a woman that was from really deep pockets money, some really, really deep pockets money. The family was just very wealthy. So they were part of some organization, and he would not tell me the name of this organization, but they were part of some organization that they brought him into the fold, and they took him up the ranks very quickly. At the top of this organization, they did some kind of strange mind control techniques. I don't know how they did it. He did not explain what or how. He just explained the after effect was that he was kind of a receiver of this information, and they would project imagery to him. And he could see it, and they would project headlines to him. They would project these alien beings to him, these UFO craft, but he saw it as if it were real, as if it were happening for real. He went on in life, got a divorce, moved back here to my neck of the woods, and now he was taking my hypnosis class. And what he really was asking is if I could help him to not be able to see this anymore, because he was still seeing these things. They were still able to project these things, and he was seeing aliens in his home. He was seeing UFO craft in the sky, and it was troubling to him. It was bothering to him. Now, that in and of itself, it's like, okay, maybe he was part of some kind of a mind control program by this organization. I really don't know, for sure. But he was telling me this. And at one point, I'm not really a paranoid person. I haven't been involved in anything that bizarre in my life to cause any kind of real deep paranoia about much of anything. But at one point, I kind of got the sense that he was wanting me to know this existed more than he was wanting help to get rid of it. I didn't know for sure what his intent was. Well, he left that night, and a couple of days later was our regular class time. And I wasn't feeling well, and I asked my husband at that time if he would call the students and just ask them not to come into class that night. So he did, and this man's phone number was disconnected. And he never came back to class. I never got in touch with him. It was like he just disappeared off the planet. I don't know what happened to him. But this was all just a very strange thing. So in the book, I have to do a little bit of research, but I put in there this idea that not everything we see may be actually what we are seeing. There could be some form of a projection of some sort. And I know when I was studying UFOs, same thing. There were a lot of people that remembered seeing a UFO. They remembered some kind of alien, possibly an abduction. Sometimes they would go under hypnosis to get more information about that. Now, I don't consider hypnosis a truth serum by any means. It's real iffy if you're going to get exact good information from that. But it's a starting point. And with time, you can sometimes piece things together and maybe get some kind of an idea of what's happened to you. But I know in several cases that they would start having these memories once they kind of broke down that barrier, that they would see alien beings, but they would also see the military at the same time. They would be in bunkers with both. And they couldn't figure out exactly what was happening. But with time, sometimes they would come to the conclusion, I did not reach this with them necessarily. They would just come to the conclusion that this was more of a projection or a mind control program that they were part of, more than it was an actual UFO craft or alien abduction. Now, I'm certainly not saying that all craft that we see or aliens that people see or Bigfoot that people see are in any way just a projection. But I think we have to give that kind of technology or even mental ability to have mind control over anyone else some kind of credibility, because it could be some kind of a larger program that we're just unaware of. So that was kind of an odd thing that I ended up putting it in the book as one of those theories. Also holograms, some holograms now, they can make them where you can touch them, feel them, smell them. You can't tell them much from actual physical reality. So there's all kinds of other things that might be happening. The popular theory is that maybe there's some kind of a dimensional thing, that these things are from another dimension. They're flipping back and forth between the two. Through my interviews, mostly with people for my channel, my YouTube channel, they started talking about these strange boxes, and people would walk into them and they'd be out there Bigfoot hunting. Or hunting, I shouldn't say just hunting. They're out there doing research, and it's in the middle of the night. And there would be this box-like thing form. They could only see it through the night vision or the infrared. They could see this thing form. When people would walk into it, they would just disappear. Their signal, the infrared signal would just be gone while they were inside this box. The people who in the box, it said that the reality completely changed as they would go inside this thing. They could no longer see stars. They could no longer see the wooded area on each side of them. The ground was different. They'd be on tall grass, and they'd walk into this thing, and it was just smooth, short grass. It felt like walking through Jell-O, one person said, which was kind of an unusual thing too. Now, this was while they were Bigfoot researching that they discovered this strange box. But these guys came back out of the box, and this thing that was out there in this field, it got smaller when they moved out, and then it moved over to the side. So it's some kind of a who knows what it is. But that started being described in a few of my interviews. But I remembered, there again, going back to my UFO days, this woman that described something mildly similar to this. She was highly educated. She was a university professor, and she'd read the book Communion, which is a very popular UFO book back in the 90s. And she was talking to her husband, and then, long story short, they discovered that possibly they'd had some contact with some aliens, or some UFO stuff was happening to them. And their world kind of turned upside down, because these were very, very very rational, logical human beings. I think she taught like statistics or something like that. I mean, that's about as rational as you can get. So their world had kind of turned a little bit upside down. But one day she said she walked over to the neighbor's house, and it was broad daylight, midday. She was borrowing something or talking to them about something. And there was quite a bit of space between the houses. There was a big yard and trees and such there. And she's just, happy as could be, walking back to her own home. And she described it as walking through a wall. And that's exactly the way those guys in the field that walked into that box described it. It was like they walked through a heavy, heavy curtain. She walked through this wall, and suddenly she could see this UFO craft and these little alien beings walking around the yard. And she said her whole demeanor like went into kind of I would think of it as maybe shock, because there was no emotion. She was just standing there watching this with no sense of herself, really just observing. And then suddenly it clicked off and it was gone. And now she's hysterical. This whole imagery was suddenly gone, and she's realized she's reacting to it, what she just saw. And this is not normal. This is not what we normally see. But thinking about those two incidences, it kind of puts us into a thing where maybe not a dimension, but some kind of another reality that's contained maybe in some way, but that we maybe enter or exit something that allows us to see these things. Certainly not everyone has that type of an experience. I mean, as you know, when you see a Bigfoot in the woods, sometimes it's just like a being in the woods. It's just a very natural, normal experience. You don't have that kind of switch on, switch off. But some people do have that switch on, switch off. So you have to separate those experiences. And as you know, most of the evidence we have right now about any of these cryptids really is anecdotal. It's, people's personal experiences. And I take their experiences very seriously. So that's kind of my motivation for the book, was to just get all of this written down before I was too old to put it down. So that's the book was born.
So as Linda, the author and documentary maker, you have like I said, you have a very fascinating background in ufology, hypnosis, remote viewing. Let's go back and tell us a little bit how you got into that phenomenon and how that all came about.
Well, I was doing hypnosis first. Didn't really know anything about UFOs or any of that sort of thing, but I was doing hypnosis. This would have been around 1990 that there was a flap of UFO activity that came through our area. It made the news, everybody was flocking to this area, this rural area where there were a lot of UFOs being seen. And so I found out about a group, a MUFON group that was meeting in my area every month. They had a meeting. Didn't really expect to get as involved in that as I did, but I really enjoyed the people there. That was before the days of internet, that was very strong. So we didn't have a chain of information the way we do today. There wasn't all these podcasts out there on UFOs. We had books, and that was about it. So the meeting was really vital for getting information, new sightings, new information, new books that were out. Sometimes we'd watch videos at that meeting. But the man who was directing that meeting in my area, he was a hypnotherapist, and he was working with people. It's kind of the heyday of a lot of books coming out about abduction and using hypnosis as a means to obtain that. Bud Hopkins was, his book was very popular then. Well, I was a hypnotherapist as well. So there was a lot of overflow that he needed help with. So he just put those on my list to do the hypnosis. So that was a real eye-opener. It was a real up-close and personal experience with the people that they felt they had been abducted by aliens. They only had vague memories, and the memories were often, they'd be a child at night and they'd see a light out their bedroom window, or they'd see a blue light coming through the window, or they'd get up to get a drink of water and see something outside, a craft or something outside on the ground. This one lady had a really scary experience. She had a son. He was probably 4 or 5, something like that. And she just opened up his bedroom door to check on him one night, and his entire room was just lit up like daylight. And this was in the middle of the night. So it was very scary things, that reality not behaving as we expect reality to behave. There's not a source for light. We don't expect the light to be there. We don't expect craft to be outside of our house, on the ground. We don't expect little alien beings coming in the room. So these people would want to have more information because they realized that they were blocked. They had no further memory of anything that happened from the time that they might remember that light or maybe even see a being. And a few of them might even remember going aboard a craft or something, but they don't know how they got there. They don't know what the circumstance was around that. And sometimes they can break through to that memory and sometimes they can't. Hypnosis can help them to sometimes dislodge some of those memories, however. So that's kind of how I got drawn into the UFO phenomena. And then I started my own research group. So actually we had our own monthly meetings. It was called the Midwest Research Society. And I did that for about 10 years. And I took people all over the country doing research on UFO sightings. Talking to people, going to the locations where these sightings had happened. I took my own, we took our own reports. We would go to sites and see what research we could do. Then I had a radio show for a while with Ted Phillips, which is a name that most people don't know. But Ted Phillips was a sidekick to J. Allen Hynek, who did the Blue Book project for the U.S. government on UFOs. And he traveled all over the world with J. Allen Hynek doing research on UFO land sightings where they actually had a craft had landed. They had physical evidence. They only researched physical evidence, which kind of reminds me of Bigfoot researchers, where they're trying to find that physical source of evidence. Ted was just a wealth of information on cases, of all kinds of cases, and well connected. Jacques Vallée, Stanton Friedman. These were people that were just like his friends, people I didn't have access to. So we did the radio show for quite a while. Got a lot of good information from that as well. That took me all that time. I was developing more my intuitive style, my intuitive skills, and eventually went on to do remote viewing, studied with a lot of the guys who were part of the Stargate program, worked for the CIA, did some really heavy duty, remote viewing research, started teaching that as well, traveling across the country, build a business in that, actually just, helping people to be more aware of more of who they are and what they can access, information they can access. We put a group together, an associative remote viewing group together back in the 90s, and we tested everything because I am a firm believer in not just the woo and taking, things at face value, but rather to be able to test it, prove it, see how accurate you are, get the statistics on it, know your rate of success, because otherwise you're just second guessing yourself all the time if you're right or wrong. You just don't know. So these were future things. We did stocks, and my husband would actually pick the stock. The group did not know what stock we were viewing, but we would see with over a period of time if it would go up by 20% or not go up by 20%. We got a really high return. We did it for about a year, and we did it at least once or twice a week for about a year. And we had about an 85% success rate, which is phenomenally good. I mean, it is just unreal. So I'm putting another one of those together now. And so far, we've only been doing it about a month. We haven't started keeping our statistics yet because we're still kind of in training. But we're starting to do that again. So that took me through the remote viewing thing. Now, how I got involved with Bigfoot, that was totally by accident. Let me tell you, I was doing some remote viewing, filming, and documentary making. And my background has been real estate investing. That's my bread and butter. That enables me to do a lot of other things that I like to do. But I'm getting older. It's harder to manage those by myself. So I've been thinking about selling those and kind of going into maybe something else. And a friend of mine who is kind of intuitive like me, we will often just ask each other an intuitive question, see what we come up with. And she just, casually said, I don't think you're going to stay with the real estate stuff. I think you're going to, be diversified from that and go into something else. I can see that in your future. And then she made this little remark at the end. She said, oh, by the way, it was Bigfoot that came to me and told me this. And I go, Bigfoot, really? Because I know nothing about Bigfoot. Bigfoot is like not on my radar whatsoever. It was like just way out there foreign to me. So it's like, okay, but I did notice, it caught my attention. And I did notice on Facebook, there was a conference, the first Bigfoot conference ever to come to my area. Was happening that year in October. That would have been 2022. In October, they were having a conference here. I knew none of the speakers. I knew none of the people there, but I was kind of looking at some of them to maybe get an interview for my other show. And so as I was looking at this, Scott Nelson, the linguist that reviewed and analyzed the Sierra sounds, he was one of the speakers at this conference. So he kind of caught my attention, and I listened to him, and found out he lived only 3 hours away from me. So I went up, spent a weekend in his neck of the woods. He came, spent the day. We got 6 hours of footage, came back, put together Bigfoot, the language, which was my very first interview and video on anything related to Bigfoot. Put it out, and it just kind of took off. It for my little channel, which was very unknown at the time. I think I had maybe 10 videos up, and most of them had 500 views. It was just a very, very small channel. And this just took off. Bigfoot people liked it. And from there, I've had a following. So now I'm going to have to satisfy the people that want to see Bigfoot stuff, even though I don't know any of these people. I don't know who knows something about Bigfoot. So I had to scurry around and try to find shows. And there was a couple not far from me that had been on a few shows. They contacted me, and I went to their house, and they had documented things so well, the incidences that had happened at their home. And so that was one of my early releases of Bigfoot, The Limits. And then I got another few interviews, and then I started the Zoom interviews, which is more like a podcast. And that kind of took me up to wanting to do something, because I like to be in the field. I like to be out there filming, not just the podcast, even though those are okay too. Learned a lot from those, but we made Byways of Bigfoot, which was the film we released last March from there. So in a year and a half, I've got like 300 interviews and a film out, on Bigfoot, all from that initial interview I did with Scott Nelson, Bigfoot, the language.
So let's jump back for a second. And one of the things that's always fascinated me is remote viewing. And most of us who were outside the paranormal community at the time, our first even knowing about remote viewing probably came from Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell.
Yes.
That was the big intro to remote viewing for me, at least. So how closely related are the practices of hypnosis and remote viewing?
Well, I was introduced to what I'm going to say, intuitive skills. I kind of put those all in the same place. It's just a different method of getting the information. I was kind of introduced to those intuitive skills more from the basis of going into a hypnotic state and being able to access that information. And that's more of an Edgar Cayce type of method. If you've ever heard of Edgar Cayce, he went into a somnambulistic state, which means you have no memory. When you come back out, you're in like that deep, deep, deep state. Like when you go to sleep at night, you go into that deep, deep state of sleep. You don't remember how many times you twisted and turned during the night. You don't remember if you spoke a word during the night. You hear a sound outside. You don't remember the sound you heard. Well, when you're in that really deep state, you don't remember things, but you can access a lot of information. Your consciousness really isn't tied just to your physical body. With remote viewing, it's a whole different process, but it's the same. It's basically the same thing, but it's a way different process because you're more consciously awake and alert. And it's a process that was developed at the Stanford Research Institute. And then eventually the CIA said, hey, we think we could use this for spying. And so they did use it for spying for quite a few years. So I've met a lot of those people, been to conferences with them, took a lot of their classes, learned a lot from them. Great people. I can just say that they were just wonderful people. They make you feel like you're in somebody's backyard having a barbecue more than, that they have this phenomenal skill. And I envy all of them and in the ways that they can use this. But they really gave me an insight that this can be used to gather information. Now, with what I'm doing is a way of gathering information on a yes/no question. Will this stock go up or will it not go up? Will this ball team win or will this ball team win? That's an either or question. And you do it all blindly. You have no idea what your target is. You have no idea what you're going for. So if you can draw that and describe it, whatever that picture is, I mean, that's huge, to be able to do that. And the criteria of judging it is so rigid, it's so extremely rigid, that you've got 0 to 7 points, and you have to get in that top 3 points before you can call it a hit. Everything else is a miss. So it's pretty rigid. You can't have information in there that doesn't relate. It's not ambiguous. In other words, it has to relate to the actual image that you're drawing. So once I got involved with that, I teach everything I know I teach. I mean, that's just my nature. I give everything away that I gain access to. So I try to help people understand that there's a lot more information out there that they also can have access to. With ethics, of course, you don't gather information about someone or something that you don't feel like you should. There's a limit to what one should use this for, and certainly use it in a proper way. But I find it to be just absolutely fascinating. I've done it for such a long time now. I forget that other people don't do this. I forget that other people don't even understand how it's done. Sometimes, but it's something that's just second nature to me at this time.
Now, for people who practice remote viewing, and again, I've not heard a lot of accounts. I've obviously heard things that were on Coast to Coast AM, etc., a few other shows here and there. Is it possible, while in the course of remote viewing, to encounter negative spiritual entities or anything of that nature?
Probably depends on the person. For me personally, I have never experienced anything negative on anything I've done. Never a moment has there been any kind of fear or anything enter the picture that I think is demonic or trying to take over or trying to do anything. But for me, I think, I wasn't born doing this. I didn't have like all these like moments that a lot of psychic people tend to have. I just wasn't born that way. So for me, everything that I did happened from about the time I turned 40 up. So I had a lot of maturity about myself when I entered this. And since I hadn't had any previous experiences, it was all learning and being trained and being very much in control of where my mind went and what I saw and what I did. With remote viewing itself, from the Stargate people that were involved in that, they didn't seem to have any qualms about this. This was just a mental skill. It would be like me saying, okay, if you learn to read English and you learn the symbolism of the ABCs, that somehow you pick up a book, is it going to somehow then coax you into something, something else? If you were looking for some kind of weird spiritual something, yeah, I guess it probably could. If you read a really, really scary book or a true book or something, it could maybe put you in some kind of a panic state or something. I don't know. But for the most part, if you're just doing this, using it like a skill, it's just like picking up a book and reading it. And I just haven't had any problems or issues with it. I can't say that anyone that I have trained has either. Now, I know people that have had issues or problems all their life and that have been psychic and had issues with, different kinds of cryptids and entities and beings, that kind of entered their world, some scary things. And having been involved with hypnosis with a lot of people that have had those scary things, I can say that some people probably shouldn't get involved in this because they probably are already invested in things that they don't feel they have control over.
So, coming from the background of being a teacher and hypnosis and remote viewing, you're entering the world of cryptids now, of Bigfoot, of dogmen, and etc. You then come across the phenomenon of mind speak.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about your introduction to that and how it first came to your attention and some of the stories that you've heard about mind speak with cryptids.
Sure. I think the first time I heard the term was during that 6-hour filming process with Scott Nelson. That was the first time I heard the term mind speak. But as he described it, I realized, that's just very much a telepathic kind of communication that Bigfoot has with humans, the same way aliens tend to have that same type of telepathic communication with humans. Now, can we trust it? Do we know if it's real or not? I mean, there's all kinds of things that I teach to help people understand when they're getting an impression that's not of your own making, your own thoughts. and when something is outside of you and something is inside of you. So I think, some people may say they have mind speak. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know if they know the difference. It may appear that way. There again, also those messages can be projections. So we have to look at a larger picture of that person, maybe, what's happening in their world, their life. But I have no doubt that they would be able to do mind speak with Bigfoot or anything really. I myself have gone in and done quite a bit of remote viewing and looking at and trying to communicate myself with Bigfoot locations when we made the film Byways of Bigfoot. There was an area that was made really clear to me through my intuition that this would be where we could find them. And that I said, I clarified that I want to be able to see you if we go there. And it was interesting. And I haven't filmed since we did the first episode. So I haven't filmed any further on the docuseries. I haven't filmed anything else, but this was an area that I don't know the exact location, but I know the parameters of the location between two very large hills. It was back in a gully, and it was a dirt road that was a dead end. So that would be something that we could find. We were only filming along the Niagara River. So, I would just look for that. And there's a goat farm there. There's a goat farm right at that end of that gravel road. And just up into that gully beyond that is like a place where they a habitat, I guess, that of Bigfoot. Now, I haven't been able to prove that, and until I do, that just is a theoretical idea out here that came to me through intuition or remote viewing. But if we went there and we did find a clan of Bigfoot living there, then I could definitely say, okay, we've had some mind speak with Bigfoot, that Bigfoot is directing us to be able to find them.
Oh, fascinating. Before I continue, I want to throw the ball over to my co-host over there in Quincy, Washington. And Matt?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about, you were talking about the remote viewing programs, and especially that gentleman at the beginning of the discussion. I started thinking about the government program that I couldn't quite put my finger on what the name was. I looked it up real quick, and it was a Project Stargate. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of wondering if maybe this group of people were somehow associated with that.
I don't know of anything that Stargate did that was projection related at all. That MK Ultra was mind control program that was done by the CIA. That would be more what I would say he was experiencing. But this was an organization. He did not say it was government related in any way. And I think mostly the MK Ultra program, people didn't know they were involved in it. This guy got involved with this voluntarily because it was his family. He was just like, okay, we're learning to do this, or we practice this. This is what we do in this organization. I don't know exactly how he was convinced that he was going to be the guinea pig to be the receiver of all this information. He just was at a point where he couldn't stop it. Now, I have had, interesting enough, when you're in hypnosis, you get a lot of really strange things that come your way. And early on in those days, I would get people who had gone through very, very rigid mind control. They felt like it was mind control programs that taught them to be ultra, really dynamic salespeople. This program that made them almost robotic towards sales or, making money. Wow. And they felt like they couldn't get this out of their head. It was like they were just programmed. They were just on like a robot, just going out there and doing this, and they couldn't stop it. And they would come to me to be deprogrammed. Literally to be deprogrammed. Wow. Now, I'm not sure I had the qualification to deprogram something that was that deep in them, but we would work on that. We would work on, kind of changing the dialogue in their mind, changing this back so we could reverse engineer basically their mind back to ground zero again, where they could be clear and make their own decisions, they felt. So those programs are out there in varied ways, and I talk about this in the book too. And there's a lot of really strange things that people do to one another, whether they do it voluntarily or against their will or unknown to them. Stargate on the remote viewing stuff really didn't have a lot to do with that. However, it was more just being able to see things, draw things, use it as a spying technique.
In my head, I was thinking about MK Ultra instead of Stargate. Now that I know about Stargate, I got something else to read about.
There's a lot out there about Stargate. Goodness, it was so back so far in the 70s. Of course, it wasn't declassified until like the 90s, I think, when they started coming out with the books. And just their stories are they're just unreal. I love listening to them. There's a lot on YouTube about them too, the Stargate program. And the remote viewers were just really, really good. And a lot of them took that skill and turned it into businesses. One person worked for businesses and using that skill, and then other people used it, like to track down missing people. Just there was all kinds of ways that to get information. As a matter of fact, at one point there was a woman. She never really came forward and came out. She didn't want publicity. She just did the work. But President Carter at the time acknowledged her, that it was through remote viewing that they were able to find this downed plane that they could not find at all. And it had some really vital information they needed to retrieve. And it had gone down somewhere, I think in Africa. And she was able to remote view the coordinates of this. And they were able to go right to it, get this stuff and get out of there. And President Carter acknowledged that it was through remote viewing that they were able to do that. So it has value, it has value to all of us, but it's something most people don't want to, it's not something that's normally used in our day-to-day life, unless you're in my world. And then most of the people I know use it. So.
Well, that's extraordinary. Thank you.
So with remote viewing again, as it relates to the world of cryptids, have you come across very many people that have expressed the desire to use remote viewing in cryptid investigations with Bigfoot, for example?
They want to learn the mind speak portion of it. But I'm getting ready to teach a class at this next conference I'm going to in October on mind speak. And one of the things I hope to introduce to people is that, if you can find where they are and ask permission to be able to see them when you get there, it would just cut through the chase of a lot of the extra work of going and seeing them or not seeing them. So there's lots of ways you can gather information. Okay, are you going to be there when I get there? Is this worth the trip? There's one way to look for something, and then there's another way to look for something. I use this when I'm Christmas shopping. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it may sound like it doesn't have the same meaning, but it really does. Rather than to go from store to store to store to store to try to find a certain item that I'm looking for as a gift, I just shortchange that, remote view it. Where do I need to go? Where will this item be? And through remote viewing, there it is. Okay, so I just cut out tons of shopping time and just went directly to the information. Another way you can use this, which isn't as prominent, but you lost your keys. Okay, where are they? I would go in and just ask, where are they? Because I remember once losing my keys and I knew they were not in this one room. Consciously, I'm thinking it's not in this one room. I had the teaching room and I thought, I haven't been in there. I haven't had my keys in there. But apparently I had, because when I remote viewed, I saw this stack of books in that room and all of the things around them. And sure enough, there was my keys. So, you can just use it for practical things, but you can also use it for more phenomenal things. You can get answers to things. There again, you have to be cautious, because if you can't prove if those answers are correct or not, it's a more difficult thing. I remember years ago, I used to do just a group that we would meet weekly at my home, and they would write a question. Some of them, anyone who had a question, they'd write it on a 3x5 card, turn it over. I would not know the questions nor who wrote the question. And I would shuffle those up, put a 4-digit number on the back of the card, and that's all I had, to do it. And this one night, no idea. And the questions could be varied, it could be anything. I mean, it was a diverse group, so it could be anything. But this one night, I remember these 4 images came in very quickly. And one was like an opening down, like a tunnel underground. There was a large pod-like thing. It looked kind of like a clam, but much larger. That was on top of the ground. There was a tower that reached up very high into the sky. And then there were these arches, kind of looked like McDonald's arches, only maybe a little bit wider. And I didn't know what I was remote viewing, but the minute I came out, I didn't look at my question. I just drew those 4 things because that seemed to be the answer. I didn't know what I was remote viewing, but that seemed to be the answer to whatever was on the other side. When I turned the card over, it said, "What is on the moon?" Well, how in the world are we ever going to know something like this might even think about being on the moon? I don't know. So I just blew that off. Unless I can prove something, I put that in the pile of, yeah, maybe, but most likely not. That's just my need for verification on a lot of things that I do. I'm a real stickler with that. So I kind of put it over there in that pile of whatever. So I was going to a UFO conference within a week or two. It wasn't very long. And there was a book dealer there. I knew him. So I walked up and just started talking. And then I said, "Oh, hey, do you know any books that talk about things that might be structures that might be on the moon?" And he said, "Sure." And he handed me a book by Ingo Swann. Now, Ingo Swann was the psychic that the Stanford Research Institute modeled their way of doing their remote viewing program after. He was that good. He was really very good at doing remote viewing. So there was a book called Penetration, and a very odd story that Ingo Swann had written this book, that he was commissioned to do some remote viewing for people. They were willing to pay him, but he could not know anything about the project, and he had to go with them and live in an underground bunker for quite a while. He knew it wasn't the government, and the reason he knew that was because he had done a lot of remote viewing for the government, and they didn't pay very well. But this guy was willing to pay a lot if he would just go live there for a time and do remote viewing constantly about whatever subject they were wanting to know about. He did not know what it was. But eventually he was told that it was what is on the moon, that same question basically. And they had a lot of questions about that. Well, in the middle of this book, I open it up and there are 2 pages of just drawings that Ingo Swann has made of things that he saw on the moon. And I'll be right there, on those 2 pages, there was my underground tunnel, exactly the way I drew it. There was the tower, the arches, and the pod, even called. It was called those same things. So I only drew 4 of them in a few seconds at my house. And Ingo Swann worked, several months and got a lot of information about things on the moon. We still don't know 100% for sure if those things are on the moon. I don't know. But it was really verifying that at least somebody else had seen the same things I saw. So,
Yeah.
So when people remote view, when they're going into the preparation to exercise this practice, do people normally have a special room? Do they have to meditate before doing this? What's the general setup before people exercise this skill?
lots of people have their own little rituals, that seem to help them. I can say that if you understand how the brain communicates, front, back, side to side, the more of that you can develop through meditation, calming yourself, allowing that communication to happen, the more likely you are to get the answers. Now, for me, because I wasn't born psychic, I didn't just have this information coming through. I practiced this for a really long time, and I was very rigid in verifying what I was looking at or seeing. So for me, I think it was repetition, and it was repetition of doing it correctly and being able to pay attention. Okay, what was my state of mind? What time of day was it? What did I have to eat? All of these things that might have a bearing on a distraction from the actual signal. And mostly it was knowing when I had let go of my own thoughts and moved into an area where I could be in a receptive state of mind to be able to receive some information. And I pose a question, get an answer back, pose a question, get an answer back, and then be able to verify if that was correct or not. So yes, it helps for you to be in a peaceful, quiet state of mind, no distractions. It helps if you do it on a regular basis, repetitively, 1 a day, maybe 3 a week, something like that, where you can develop that. And it was much later on, someone got a book for me called The Talent Code. And it talked about people who become really, really good athletes or really, really good musicians. And the thing is, practice. I mean, they practice one tiny little move. These Brazilian soccer players, they will practice one tiny little move to the point where it is so ingrained in their brain, they don't have to think about it. It's just automatic. It's automatic. Well, that's kind of where I got to. It was like I didn't have to think about it. If I could just go there, and I was immediately in that space. But for a lot of people, because they don't know where that space is, and you're kind of a shot in the dark, if you're going into those inner levels trying to find that, you really do have to practice a while sometimes. Some people are more natural at it than others, but you have to practice at it a while. But once you get that going, you've built enough myelin around those neural pathways that, you got it, you own that. So that becomes a definite skill that you can use over and over.
So for a lot of people in the Bigfoot community, the ufology and Bigfoot paths intersect. There is that segment of the community that closely relates Bigfoot to extraterrestrials. Have you come across many people that have claimed to have seen UFOs in the vicinity of Bigfoot locations?
Not very many, but a few people have. Mostly what I do, at first, I'm just thinking, well, Bigfoot is just this being in the woods. And so I don't even ask those questions. And then as it slowly started just automatically sort of coming up, the orbs, the lights, now I just ask them if they've seen any craft. Have you seen any orbs? I seldom get anyone that have ever seen them together, but a few people have reported that they have seen them in the same vicinity. But the people who see, now this is what's interesting, the people who see Bigfoot, maybe it's just because they're outside a lot and they're in areas that are remote, but a lot of the people who see Bigfoot also have seen a UFO. Most of them haven't seen aliens at all. I mean, that doesn't seem to cross over. A few people do, but most of them no. But maybe it's just because they're out in the wilderness, they're out in remote areas. Maybe they're more likely to see a craft in the sky. I don't know. But a few people can put them in the same location. Now, this is what was interesting. There's a case that I'm studying right now that was very close to where we filmed Byways of Bigfoot. And I'm going to be honest with you. The only thing we had to go on at the time when I started filming that was one location where the guy had vocals and he'd never seen anything, just vocals. So I thought, well, it would still be a good nature show to put together. We'll at least go out and try to see if we can find it. Sure. At the end of the day, we were able to, almost every day we went out, we found footprints, we found, tree branches, twisted and turned, a lot of varied things. And I got information even today. We put some jars out that difficult to get them open. And we put those in trees and they had shiny blue beads or like glass items in them. And just today, this has been not quite, maybe 9 months since we put those out on that location. And just today, he found that they had been discovered and were open. And out.
Oh, wow.
So that was kind of interesting. But since then, I have heard multiple stories of Bigfoot sightings in the area. There was a farm back in probably back in the 90s, that there was a farm that, back then, Bigfoot wasn't really very popularly known. It just wasn't. It wasn't on anyone's radar in that neck of the woods, I'm sure. But this guy said he started reporting to the other farmers in the area. It's a very rural area. That there was something on his farm that looked kind of monkey-like. It was hairy and big, and he might have been seen a juvenile. I don't know. But the whole community kind of rallied around, well, what kind of creature has escaped a zoo? That's kind of where they were going, not even thinking Bigfoot. And then a neighbor to this same guy started seeing the same things on his place. So that just came in after I filmed Byways of Bigfoot, that report, that was never reported anywhere. I'm the only one that's probably heard it that has any interest in Bigfoot itself. But those were really, really close to where we were filming. And then there was another person that said when they were young, they would go to the river that we were filming at and swim and, fish and do all kinds, it was just a recreational kind of river. And some guys came out of an area where we actually found footprints and told them, be careful because Bigfoot is back here. This thing is back here in the woods along those cliffs. Well, those are the same cliffs that we filmed at. And that story came in after we filmed too. So I think there's a lot more that's probably happening in that area than I even knew about. So that was one thing that surprised me.
And Matt, let's pull up that trailer for Byways of Bigfoot.
Yeah, here we go.
Woo! 15 inches, same individual as we found up there.
What are you seeing over there?
I'm trying to figure out a stride here. This one walked uphill.
Excellent, excellent. Linda, tell us about some of the things you learned during that filming process.
Well, one of the things I learned is as a 70-year-old woman out in the field, you really need a good camera crew with you because there were places I wasn't going to be able to maneuver. I'll tell you. That was probably the greatest lesson I had. I forget I'm everybody else in the film.
Right.
But I had a lot of good people willing to grab a camera and move forward with it. So that was one of the things I learned. But what I really learned was that we're just not observant. There's evidence in so many places that if you don't know to look for that, you will never see it. And once we started looking for things, once we actually started observing all of the evidence that was around, I was like, wow, I was just taken back that we found anything. And then to think of all of the times I would go out there and film by myself. I would go to these conservation areas and just take a camera and spend the day, filming. And I'm thinking now, it's like, and Bigfoot was there all this time probably, and I didn't know it. So I guess another thing I learned was always take somebody with you, when I'm out filming like that. But there isn't always someone available to do that. But I was scouting out areas for us to really set up camp and do some further research. So that was something that I kind of needed to do as the producer and director of the film. But also that they were kind of coy, that I didn't expect us to really get an image of them or to actually see one. If we had spent more time in some of those locations, we would have. I got sick in the middle of that. We planned to film through the winter, and I got sick for a time, and I decided, okay, I'm just going to abort the winter filming for the time being, and maybe we'll get back to it, sometime this fall whenever it cools down and everybody's ready to go back out and film some more, because it was a lot of fun and it was really interesting. I kind of let the people who knew a lot more about Bigfoot research. We had Ron Bowles with us. He saw a Bigfoot, oh goodness, back in, I don't know what the year it was, probably 70s or 80s, somewhere way back there. And, he's been on a search for Bigfoot information ever since. He takes people on expeditions and things to find Bigfoot evidence and possibly see a Bigfoot. So he was with us along the way, kind of coaching us. Everybody else was kind of rookies like me, not knowing exactly how to approach that, but he knew what to look for. So I learned a lot from him in being able to have, a clue about how to find Bigfoot. And I knew Ron was on board. He'd been in several of my other shows, and it was good advice. He has a good solid head on his shoulders. He's not going to lead us astray. He's not going to say something is real if it's not real. So I trusted him. And one of the things that I really wanted to do in this show, because I'd had a lot of people say that shows will come in, they'll plant evidence, and it's not real. It's just for the show.
Right.
And that happens. I mean, it happens. So I wanted to make sure that everyone knew if we saw something, if we didn't find anything, that it was what we did find was real. We didn't try to make that out to be something that wasn't. Because I talked to a few people that I've done films with, that said, they were just really aggravated with film crews that would come in and then just make up stuff, So I promised them that I wouldn't do that, and promise everyone that, I just don't make up things in that regard.
And you were in the Ozarks.
I live in the Ozarks, Springfield, Missouri, and we weren't far from here when we were filming that. And this case 841 is not far from me either, that I'm researching. It has everything. It has UFO sightings, alien contact, animal mutilations, which is the one thing that I did experience, was an orange light over a field where 3 cows were mutilated. That was a story that no one else it was never reported anywhere. If I hadn't have known the neighborhood, I would not have heard that story. But I did see an orange light hovering over that pasture that night around 10 o'clock at night. The next day, they discovered the cows had been mutilated. So that happens there. There's some really a weird haunted woods. I mean, I know that sounds almost like make-believe, but urban legend has a murder happening in this woods, but then just a lot of really creepy things have been reported from that area too. And also just some disembodied voices heard at a park, and just some strangeness, and the black car surveillance are going on in that area too. But the people that have seen a lot of these things are people I really trust. I mean, my own mother saw a craft out there. And it was brief. It was just a silver, kind of looked like about the size of a car, she said, and it was moving slowly, no sound, and it went behind some trees. And her neighbor that same night saw a light way out in their field. Now, this is rural area farm country, so this was some distance from the house, but still in their field, and that with no explanation as to what that light was about. But lots of very strange things happen in this area that has everything, Bigfoot, UFOs, ghost activity. I mean, it has it all, just strangeness happening in the area.
Now, you have amassed an amazing library of interviews of people who've had all kinds of different experiences. Have you noticed a common theme among many of the experiences that have been related to you?
Well, the one thing that I want to say, because I've talked to a lot of people about a lot of things for a lot of years, but I can say the people who actually have Bigfoot encounters, they seem to me to be some of the most genuine people. They're not making it up. I don't know what they've experienced exactly, but I don't think they're making this up. And I know in the Bigfoot world, there's a lot of complaints about hoaxes and, a lot of, making things up. There have only been a few people that I didn't go ahead and put their show on the air because I thought that wasn't quite solid, but for the most part, they have been very genuine, and they, to a T, almost all of their descriptions have similarities, and their emotions have similarities. The way they reacted to them had similarities. The surprise factor on a lot of them that they weren't expecting that one, and then with the researchers that go out and they not only expected, they would like to, have an experience with Bigfoot. Some of them have had, some of them haven't. But just also they're genuine too. It's like, been out there X number of times, maybe many, many times, only saw a little bit of evidence a couple of times. Well, if you're going to make up a story, you're probably going to make it bigger than that one, but right. Nonetheless, they're out there. They may hear things. There may be some evidence, but they don't actually see Bigfoot. So I think those stories are also really, really interesting. Now, you asked me if you could put Bigfoot and UFOs in the same category. The one I did do was Ron Moorhead, the one at the Sierra camp. Oh, right. I did an interview with both Scott Nelson and Ron Moorhead at the same time, and he saw a craft, a huge dark blue craft over their campsite one night. They also saw these rods kind of moving through. And of course, there's a lot of information on Ron Moorhead, so everybody can find all of those things that he talks about. But they also talked about, and another similarity to the UFO community is when a Bigfoot's around, batteries drain sometimes, equipment doesn't work. They experience that a lot up at the Sierra camp. And Scott, more than Ron, discussed when they would get there, they would know if they're there or not. There's a feeling, there's like electricity in the air. How you can feel when a thunderstorm's coming up, yeah. There was just that sense. There's that feeling. There's something in the air. Well, he would know. And every time he would have that feeling, their batteries would drain. And sure enough, they would hear vocals or something, from Bigfoot. Or that what they assume. They're still not saying 100% because, they've seen some evidence of Bigfoot up in that area, and seen a Bigfoot, but it hasn't been clear cut that those Sierra sounds came from them. That's more assumptive, and they'll be the first ones to say that, I can tell you. But they also had, equipment failed. This is another thing that really is a thread through many Bigfoot experiencers. It's at night, they're in their tent or a campsite or something. they hear this enormous commotion, like the campsite is just being torn apart, or, like a whole forest is being torn down. And they think it's from a certain area. And Ron Moore had said they got up the next day and nothing was moved, not a thing. So what was that sound? What was this enormous sound that they were hearing? And other reporters have said the same thing. They would think they tore an entire forest down. They'll go look where they saw, trees moving around or bushes moving. They thought a Bigfoot was just destroying things over there. They go back. There's no evidence that anything has ever been there. Now, what is that? I don't know. I really don't know. A few other researchers have said they hear this rushing sound, like something is running up behind them, but nothing is there. So it isn't just the visuals, but also sound, and also normal things that we would equate to normal evidence, that if there's a sound that your camp's being torn apart, the odds are your camp's being torn apart. But no, not in this case. You can't trust that because you don't know exactly where that sound's coming from and what they're doing, but obviously it's not what you think it is.
So you've heard accounts from people from all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen any patterns in possible behavior perceptions, such as here in Alaska, the Bigfoot are kind of have a reputation for being more aggressive, whereas in other parts of the country, not so much. What is your experience with getting people's accounts where they've given different accounts of behavior?
Yeah, definitely different accounts of behavior. And also different accounts of approaching them too, seems to have some bearing as well, especially whenever I interview a woman that's had a Bigfoot encounter as opposed to a man that's maybe had a Bigfoot encounter.
Wow,
I hear from a lot of women that they just have a sense that Bigfoot's out there in their field or something. They haven't seen them. They don't know. This one, she just decided to go out and just sit there and take pictures, just a very gentle kind of thing. And it's like eventually there becomes this trust or something, I don't know, where they'll kind of sort of show themselves a little bit, that kind of, but that takes a lot of patience, and usually you have to live there wherever they are. You're not going to go out there every day and look for a Bigfoot. But eventually it becomes kind of a type of, if you can call it friendship, a type of thing like that. So I have noticed that, I've observed that approach from some women and from some men as well. We have one researcher here, that local, that does something like that. Shane Carpenter, he approaches it from, let them get accustomed to me, let them know me. So he would just go walk the same path every day, walk, or every week anyway, and just camp there, let them get to know me. I'm not hurting them, and eventually they would come closer and closer and be more friendly. Now, but as far as the aggressiveness, what I have been told anyway, oftentimes that seems like the aggression comes when there's a young one around, and they don't want you to go there. For some reason, they don't want you in there. They don't want you to be there. And one person told me an incident about, he kind of developed sort of a, we accept one another kind of thing, not real close, but, he was able to see them occasionally. And it was in a wooded area, and he went out there walking one day, and he noticed this big tree was over the road, and he knew, that didn't happen naturally, So in his mind, he thought, they don't want me in there for some reason. He didn't know why, but he thought, they don't want me in there. So he went back and he got his son and another researcher, and they decided that night to go out on this hill and just observe, see if they could see anything happening with the Bigfoot in the area. And they got there, they parked and they walked up the hill and kind of planted themselves in a location. And as the night came on, there were 12 pair of eye shine around their automobile down there. They could see it. So, they were definitely down there, he thought. And then all of a sudden there was this ball of light, kind of a UFO like thing that he described, that went swooshing down to the valley. And it was a very deep, long space down to where this thing landed, but it came in very fast and then just landed down there. All 12 of the pairs of eye shine turned around, and you could hear them going down into the valley, meeting up with this light that had just landed down there. Whether that was actually a UFO, I don't know. Whether the Bigfoot was just curious about what it was down there, I don't know. Whether it was a rendezvous, he kind of thought it was some kind of a planned thing, and they didn't want him in there that night because they knew this thing was coming down. So that would be one place where I can say that there was kind of a UFO kind of connected with Bigfoot, and they watched it for a long time, and the Bigfoot never came back up. So, but that was one incident that I thought was kind of interesting. Not aggressive though. It's kind of like it seems to be an approach of the investigator or the person that sees the Bigfoot, as well as the circumstance that they find Bigfoot in at the time. There was this one report of a man that had inherited some land, and it was like down a really long mountainous road, and it was the land was at the dead end, like right at the end of the road, and there was a gate that you had to go through then to get onto the land, and it was a really narrow road, just really steep and on a hillside. And as he wasn't a Bigfoot guy. I mean, he didn't know anything about Bigfoot, but as he's driving along in this really remote area, he sees something in the middle of the road in front of him, and it's a little fur ball, and he doesn't know what it is. And then suddenly he sees this Bigfoot come from the upper part of the hill and come down, swoop up this little one, and then head down the hill further, just get out of sight. And he's like, what is that? And the next thing he knows, to his left up on the hillside is, Papa Bigfoot, and just being ferocious, throwing things and just being, loud. And it's kind of a protective thing. It kind of looked like, because, mama and the baby are headed, down the hill. And he didn't know what to do exactly. So eventually he was able to pass on through and go to his land. But, and the big one didn't come down on the road. But now he's stuck because he's got to go back. It's the only way out of there is back down this road. So he's kind of like has to take note of his own mental and emotional condition at that point, because it was kind of a shock to his system, of course. And so he finally does get the courage to go back down the road, and he finds a dead deer on the road, by the way, on the way back, and no sign of Bigfoot. And there was no sign of Bigfoot anywhere. He drives into town, and there's a really small little town. There's a McDonald's there. He goes to McDonald's, gets a cup of coffee, and he just sits there for hours. He doesn't know how to describe what he saw. He doesn't even know if he should tell anyone what he saw. And it took him years before he told anyone. Finally, he told Ron Bowles, and Ron Bowles tells it on one of my shows. But he finally told him, but he never would give a full report of this. He just didn't want to be, it wasn't getting attention. This was just a shocking moment to him, and he didn't know how to process it. So that was kind of a really interesting account of a Bigfoot encounter that he didn't want any attention from. He barely told anyone. And just, I can just feel myself in his shoes. What do you do with this? Just sitting there alone drinking a cup of coffee. What do you do with this? This is not normal. So
based on the experience, your experiences and the accounts that you've heard through all these wonderful interviews, do you believe that Bigfoot have a clan structure?
I would say yes. It seems as if most of the people that I talk to believe that they do have a clan structure, relatively small. Nothing that's like a herd of buffalo or anything like that. It's as a small clan where they're sustainable, probably food wise, and territorially speaking. It seems as if they do. Oftentimes, people who and I'm sure you know this better than I, the people who are hardcore researchers that know an area. They start getting, footprints of the babies, and they see the growth on them, and they can identify those footprints, from one cast to another as they mature, and they can tell, the females from the males, and they start to get to know them as a family unit and as a clan and then the young ones, may go off and go a different place, and they may migrate as a clan from one place to another based on probably food source. Mm-hmm. Would be most likely the reason. But it does seem like they do have that pattern and are definitely clan oriented. One of my very first stories I ever heard about, I just started doing this, but this was a firsthand encounter. I was talking to this guy that was not about Bigfoot at all. And I just kind of randomly said, okay, but what do you know about Bigfoot? Just out of the blue. And he actually knew someone that had a Bigfoot encounter in this small town not far from here. This man was out mushroom hunting, which is sometimes the case. You know, people are out in the woods for various reasons, and he was out mushroom hunting. And this juvenile just kind of started peeking around a tree, and he wasn't intimidated by that. You know, the behavior didn't seem to be aggressive by any means. Juveniles can be very playful. So he would go back to the same location, and the same things would happen from time to time. And he got to know this clan that he believed, you know, was in this wooded area. But then he also found or discovered that there was a clan living in a wooded area close to an elementary school. Now, in my neck of the woods, it's a very rural area. And if you get out far enough, elementary schools can be next to a wooded area that's very private, very personally private. So he found that this clan of Bigfoot would come out and dumpster dive basically after school closed and everyone was gone, and find food from the dumpsters up, you know, the kids didn't eat. And he would go out there, put this kind of gunny sack-like thing over his head, and just kind of sit there on the ground and watch them, you know, and they didn't seem to be bothered by that. But that was a story, a very gentle story of Bigfoot. They didn't seem to be intimidated by him. He wasn't aggressive toward them at all either. And he was alone all the time. But he was so humiliated by the town. But when he would try to tell people about this, of course, you know, they just didn't believe him. And he suffered a lot socially from that, from what he was experiencing. Now, he did take some people out there to see this, and some people that I know, some researchers out there. He eventually gave a report of it to the researchers and would take them out there. I don't think any of the researchers actually saw the Bigfoot at that area, but he did show them, you know, all of the evidence he had about it. So that was another story that happened really way early on in my filming of these accounts. And that made it more believable to me, because that was right here in my backyard, and somebody that didn't have any reason to be telling me a story. But then after I started getting more into it, that guy's story about the dumpster diving and mushroom hunting and that particular area, it was a report that several of the researchers had heard as well, that and knew the guy. So it was verified through them.
So before we close, we ask all our guests this, and I know you've been asked this a million times, but based upon all of your experience and all of the accounts you've gathered and all the work and the commitment you've put into this study, what do you think these Bigfoot creatures are?
That's a good question. I always ask my guests the same thing, because I like to hear what they say. At this point in time, I'm going to say I think they definitely have a flesh and blood element to them. But I think that some people experience them as something beyond flesh and blood. Now, whether just flesh and blood, I don't know. I think the jury's still out on any of these other reports that I have. But it seems as if they behave in a way that's very similar to the aliens and the UFO craft. They're here, they're gone. They have, you know, some element of physicalness. You know, those craft, the UFO craft, they left prints on the ground. I mean, there was things that you could research. There are marks on people's bodies when they're abducted. There's a physical element to this, that it's not just a flesh and blood thing, but it's not absent of that. That's for sure. So I'm gonna say that they're flesh and blood with some very unusual properties that seem to take them outside of what we would consider normal flesh and blood. I don't know what that is, though.
Matt, go ahead and pull up that book. So, Threshold to Encounters, where can people get your book?
Amazon.com. You can just go in there and look up Threshold to Encounters and be able to find it. It's $20, I think is what they're selling it for. So you can order that, have it in a few days.
Now, will there be a sequel to this one?
Oh, I'm always writing a book. I mean, it's finishing them. That's always the hard thing. I'm working on a criminal story actually right now that I'm kind of trying to tie in. I'm also working on that case 841, which a lot of case 841 is in this book, but not in as much detail as the book I'm working on. And also there are new reports coming in that area, case 841, all the time. So I'm working on both of those things. At the same time, I have this remote viewing project going. So I always have things that are out there. So you never know exactly which book or which course or what the next step will be that I'm going to do. That depends on which one I get done first.
And what do you have upcoming conference-wise? What's on the horizon?
I'm going to be speaking at the X conference here in Springfield in October. I believe it's 11th, 12th, and 13th, somewhere around that. It's that weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I'm going to be talking about the book. I'm going to talk about the correlation and the connections I see between Bigfoot, UFOs, and ghost activity. That's paranormal aspect of this, kind of a lot of what we've been talking about today. So that's what I'm going to be presenting at that conference. I'm also going to teach a Mind Speak course at MD. It's an hour, so it's very introductory, because a lot of my classes are very lengthy, but that's an introductory class, but it's a good introduction to be able to get your feet in the water, to be able to maybe have more understanding of what it means to have an intuitive or remote viewing type of experience with Bigfoot.
Excellent. Matt Slater up in Quincy, Washington. Any closing thoughts?
I would really like to take that class. If
I'll let you know.
I ever had a chance, I would really like to take one and learn how to do that. It seems like an invaluable piece of equipment to be able to use mentally.
It
in
is.
this field of research.
And we'll be doing a lot of these online, so you'll be able
Excellent.
to sign up for those. I don't have them together yet, but we're working on it.
That's excellent.
Linda Eastburn, Byways of Bigfoot documentary, Threshold to Encounters. We really do appreciate your time coming on today. You put so much into this, so much research, so many great interviews, and that's why I consider you an investigative journalist in the world of cryptids. So we really learn a lot as researchers by watching your interviews and hearing the experiences of others. So thank you for all the effort and commitment you've put into this field. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. So highly encourage you to go out and get that book and watch those documentaries because they're very educational. So for myself, CWR team member Daniel Becker in Anchorage, Alaska, for my fellow host, Matt Slater in Quincy, Washington, and once again, author and cryptid investigative journalist, Linda Eastburn. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.
For sure.